In this video, we have one very simple question. Should you spend €250, $250 on the Adios Pro 4, or should you double that amount of money and spend €500, $500 on the Adios Pro EVO 1? The price gap is huge, and you probably want to know if you need to spend more money to get better performances out of the EVO 1. I did a comparison and I will share the result with you. Hey everyone and welcome back on the channel. My name is Alex, and in today's video we have a comparison of the Adios Pro 4 and the Adios Pro EVO 1. This video is sponsored by Stride. As you can see, we have the Stride buds on the shoes, but more about that later on in the video. First of all, let's look into the specs, and there's a huge difference in terms of weight between the two shoes. This was to be expected, but 226 in my size US 11, EU 45 for the Adios Pro 4, 146 for a size 10.5, EU 44 2/3. Just keep in mind that small difference. This will also be interesting when it comes to the fit of the two shoes. But anyways, this shoe would have been way lighter than the Adios Pro 4, even if the sizes were the same. We probably would have been around 150, 152 grams for this shoe in my true to size US 11. 226 isn't a bad weight at all for the Adios Pro 4, much better than the Adios Pro 3, but the EVO 1 is just outstanding when it comes to the weight. Drop stack height, we have exactly the same numbers on the two shoes, 39mm in the heel, 39mm in the heel, 33 in the forefoot for the two shoes, 6mm drop. This is exactly the same numbers, and the Adios Pro EVO 1 took that rocker point to the back of the shoe, around 65% here of the length of the shoe, which was something new compared to the Adios Pro 3. The Adios Pro 4 also carries that same geometry, so essentially same stack height, same drop, but also very similar geometry when it comes to the rocker point. Price point, €250, $250 on the Adios Pro 4, €500, $500 on the EVO 1. This is a huge question now. Should you spend twice the money of the Adios Pro 4 and get the EVO 1? This is the whole question that we need to address today. When it comes to the upper of the two shoes, we have two different uppers. And obviously the EVO 1 being so much lighter, Adidas had to make some weight savings somewhere on this shoe, and they made some savings everywhere. The upper of the Adios Pro 4, I'm not gonna lie to you, is much more comfortable. You get a bit more padding, you get the light lock technology here in the forefoot, you get some padding on the tongue as well. You get a perfect upper, if I'm being honest with you, with the Adios Pro 4. I don't have anything in this shoe that I don't like in terms of upper. For a race day shoe, it has a good fit. It has a true to size fit, which is also super important for Adidas, especially with some of their shoes running a bit long. I don't have much to complain about, if I'm being honest. You have that little heel tab that is always very funny, some padding in the heel, and I must say something that really pleases me, not just because it's comfortable when you put the shoe on, but also because when racing in the shoe, and I did my Berlin Marathon, I PB'd in the shoes, it's very comfortable in the distance. The Adios Pro EVO 1 is much more straightforward. You don't get the same fanciness, you don't get the same level of comfort. It's not a shoe that is lacking comfort, but it's not providing you as much comfort as this one. The upper feels much more harsh, much more rigid. It doesn't really feel like comfort. It feels like something very straightforward that is just sitting on top of your foot and making the shoe work in connection with your foot. But that's pretty much it. There is a bit of padding around the heel. There is also that very funky heel tab. There's a slight padding, which I think is almost the same. I would say a bit less, to be honest, on the Adios Pro EVO 1 here on top of the tongue, preventing from getting some lacing pressure. And overall, I would say something that would compete really well against many shoes, but just feels less comfortable than the Adios Pro 4. In terms of length and fit of this shoe, like I said, this is half a size down for me, and this is something I regret, to be honest. I would have liked having this shoe in my true to size US 11. So my recommendation for you would be get the shoe in your true to size, both the Pro 4 and the EVO 1. That's probably the best way to enjoy these two shoes. In terms of midsole, we do have, again, two very different midsoles. This is Light Strike Pro, a new formulation compared to the Adios Pro 3, if you knew that shoe. And here we have Light Strike Pro EVO, which is really a different animal. This is a piece of foam that is basically CNC'd in a much bigger plaque of foam. This is a more traditional foaming process with a mold and with an injection to make it, a supercritical foam. The feeling of the two foams is also very different. Just by pressing on them, I feel how much softer this is compared to the very, let's say, it almost feels like a very dense piece of material that you can press on, but it doesn't really want your thumbs to go in it, simply because it's so dense and so much packed with material. This is much softer, you can really play with it, you can push on it, and it's not rejecting my thumbs, my fingers, as much as the EVO does. When it comes to the ride of the two shoes, we have, again, two very different experiences. The rocker point was brought backwards on the EVO 1. This was an innovation at the end of 2023 when Adidas moved that rocker point from the Pro 3 geometry to the EVO 1 at 65% of the length of the shoe. It does feel like a very early rocker, and it does feel like it's pushing you a lot on your toes, kind of requesting you to go to the next step and to the next step and to the next step and so on. They did the same on the Pro 4 when they released it in 2024, so the geometry is very similar on the two shoes. However, the biggest difference comes from the ride of the two shoes. You have the same geometry, but because this is much softer, it will ride completely different. Like I said, the midsole here is softer, bouncier, and it makes you feel like you have something more welcoming, more cushioned, more pleasant. I would, however, have a big caveat here, which is careful with the softness because at slower paces, it feels very unstable. On the other hand, the EVO 1 feels much firmer, much denser, much more direct compared to the Pro 4. The Pro 4 is that Vaporfly feel of, sinking in, getting some nice rebound, moving to the next stride, and so on. The Pro 1, the EVO 1, sorry, is much more like impact and then direct energy release. It doesn't have that sinking feeling. It doesn't have the same amount of displacement when it comes to the foam compression. It's just super direct, super aggressive, and it doesn't feel as comfortable to run in as the Pro 4. When I say comfortable, I just mean the level of cushion, because it does feel like something a bit more efficient. At least that's my feeling. We'll look at the outsole here in a second, because the two shoes have very different outsoles, and this could be a decisive point in this comparison. But first, let's look at some data. I did a test where I did 3x1K in the Pro 4, 3x1K in the EVO 1, roughly at the same pace, around 10K pace for me. And the data was recorded with these pods, the Stride pods. So everything you see now on your screen is coming from my Stride Power Center, where all my Stride data is saved. And I just pulled up on my screen the footpath visualization, which is that sort of view of how I'm running in the two shoes. The solid line is the Pro 4, the dashed line is the EVO 1. As you can see, I can play with that 3D tool just to see a bit how my footpath looks with the two shoes. First of all, they look similar. I think that's important to say. But then the EVO 1 looks like I have a higher back kick, so I kind of bring my leg a bit more high at the end of my gait cycle. And it also feels like the EVO 1 is a bit more narrow in terms of movement of my footpath. So essentially that would mean that this shoe is a bit less stable because I'm kind of going a bit more, in all directions, and I'm losing a bit of energy, a bit of power with the Pro 4, whereas the EVO 1 is a bit more centered, and I kind of keep everything a bit more together, if that makes sense. Let's look at numbers, because this is where everything is super interesting. So we have 1K for each shoe that is here on your screen. As you can see, in the Pro 4, I did that K in 3 minutes and 29 seconds with an average power of 338 watts. The same kilometer on the exact same route was done in 3:27, so 2 seconds faster in the EVO 1 with an average power of 333 watts. So 5 watts less for 2 seconds less. This means that the EVO 1 is technically more efficient indeed. Again, this is just a 1K sample for the two shoes. This is also to show you how the Stride data looks and what you can get from it if you were to use the same tool. In terms of cadence, we're looking at 176 steps per minute with the EVO 1, 174 with the Pro 4. Again, a bit less loading in the EVO 1, meaning that each step puts a bit less pressure on my lower body, and technically it's also a good thing, although cadence has to be taken with a grain of salt, because here again, 2 steps per minute isn't a huge difference. Looking at form power, so form power essentially is how much power goes into my vertical movement. You have horizontal power, form power, and then air power is the air resistance that is measured by the pods, and the aggregate of horizontal power, form power, and air power makes the total number that I just shared with you, so around that 330 watts for the two shoes. Form power, so the amount of power wasted vertically, it's not really wasted, but that goes in that vertical movement. 74 watts in the EVO 1, 75 watts in the Pro 4. So again, a bit less efficient on that vertical aspect, and vertical oscillation is confirming it because we have 54 centimeters in the Pro 4. So my chest goes up 8.54 centimeters in the Pro 4 when I'm running each step. That's the vertical oscillation. And then in the EVO 1, 8.28. So 20 millimeters less of vertical oscillation in this shoe, which again is a good sign because you want to have as little of a vertical oscillation as you can, because this means you're basically a bit more efficient. Leg spring stiffness. What is it? It's a measurement of the power that your leg is producing. So essentially, The higher the number, the stronger your leg is and the better it can recycle the power that you are producing to make you move forward. We're looking at the higher number between the two, and here the number is exactly the same, 9.9 kilonewtons per meter, which just means that the two shoes are creating the same leg spring stiffness with my running. GCT, ground contact time, we're looking at the lower number because the lower the number, the more responsive the shoe, and the better because, again, less time spent against the ground. 181 milliseconds in the EVO 1, 185 milliseconds in the Pro 4, which again goes to show, I think, how much more displacement there is in this shoe. I need to compress it before it releases energy, and that requires me to spend a bit more time each step against the ground, whereas this shoe is a bit more direct. I don't have to compress it, and therefore it is a bit more responsive. It makes sense with my subjective feelings, which is, again, I would say a good thing. Impact loading rates, I had a bit more impact loading with the EVO 1. Again, this is a metric that is interesting because it shows how much loading your legs are taking. And although I am spending less time on the ground, although I have a bit of a higher cadence, this is impacting my legs a bit more. So essentially, when it comes to saving your legs for the last 10K of the marathon, the Adios Pro 4 will do that a bit better technically. This is it for Stride metrics. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about Stride metrics. It's a fascinating tool. I've been using it for the last 7 years, and I'm super grateful they sponsored this video, so thank you very much, Stride. Last but not least, let's look at the outsole. This is a critical part of the two shoes and one that can be decisive depending on the course you intend on running with them. As you can see, we have here light traction rubber on the Pro 4 and a bit of continental rubber in the forefoot. And here on the EVO 1, you have that liquid rubber that has been applied to this shoe and that was rumored to be not very grippy. It's not just a rumor, it's actual, it's facts. It is not grippy. I ran with the two shoes on a course that was wet and that in some parts had a bit of dirt coming, from rain and just like leaves coming on the ground and such. It was just dirty, essentially. Very greasy, very dirty. On wet surfaces, the two shoes did well, although the Adios Pro 4 did better, but the EVO 1 was doing okay on the wet. However, on everything that was greasy and dirty, the EVO 1 was a nightmare. I assume that here I ran the K in 3:27. I probably had it around, 3:23, 3:24 in the EVO, and I literally had to slow down on like a section of 5 to 10 meters because I didn't have any grip on this shoe. The lesson taken from this is if you're running a course that can be wet, if your race is, a fall race, a November race, and there are chances there is going to be some rain, just do not go for the EVO 1. If you are racing in the summer, if you're racing on, distances that may be shorter than the marathon, go for the EVO 1 because it's just more responsive, more aggressive, and it will probably help you achieve a better result. If you're racing a marathon, if you're racing on wet surfaces, wet conditions, if you're looking for a bit more comfort, if stability is not an issue for you, the Pro 4 will save you €250, $250, and will be the better shoe for you. I think that's kind of the learnings between the two shoes. If I had to choose myself for a race today, it's February here in Brussels, it's wet outside, I would go for the Pro 4, although I know it would cost me a bit of power and a bit of calories every minute, every kilometer. I would need to produce more energy to move at the same speed. If we were in July and I was racing a 10K half marathon, I would, without a question, go for the EVO 1. I hope this makes sense. Thanks a lot for watching. Enjoy your run today, enjoy your ride, go beyond your limits, and I'll see you in the next one.